In this movie, I'll demonstrate how you can use the 4 shape modes to create yet another kind of special object in Illustrator, which goes by the name compact shape. And so let's start off with a definition of what I'm talking about. I'm just going to go ahead and move these guys around a little bit so that the purple square completely covers up the interior of that green ring. Then I'll go ahead and marquee these 3 shapes, and I'll click on the first icon in the first row, which represents Unite. And notice I end up with a static path outline, as indicated by the word path on the far left side of the control panel. All right, I'll go ahead and undo that by pressing Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac a few times. Things work differently if we have gaps between the paths. Notice if I go ahead and marquee the paths now and then click on the Unite icon, this time I've created a compound path, as you can see, again, on the far left side of the control panel, which gives me a little flexibility in terms of editing. So let's say that I want to move these paths with respect to each other. The easiest way to work is to just go ahead and double click on this object with the black arrow tool, and that will take you to the isolation mode, which prevents you from editing anything that's dimmed. You also have access to all of the subpaths here so that you can move them around as much as you like. You can even move them so that they're half in and half outside of the main path outline so that we have this kind of interaction. All right, so that's how you work with a compound path. Now let me show you how you create and work with a compound shape. I'm going to go up to the File menu and choose the Revert command, just so that I can restore the original version of the document. And I'll once again marquee these 3 path outlines with the black arrow tool. And this time, instead of clicking on the Unite icon, you can see that tip right there. You press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and click. And that will give you a compound shape as indicated by the words compound shape on the far left side of the control panel. And what that means is you have access to all of your original path outlines. Now, there's a couple of ways you can move them around with respect to each other. One is to double-click on the path in order to enter the isolation mode. And now notice I can move these paths independently as much as I like. And then, once you get the effect you like, just go ahead and press the Escape key in order to exit the isolation mode. The other way to work is to switch to the white arrow tool, which you can get by pressing the A key. Now, if at this point you click on one of the path outlines and just start dragging, you're going to expand that live rectangle and you're going to distort it as well, which is not what I want to do. So I'll just press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac to undo that move. Instead, if you want to select the entire shape, go ahead and Alt or Option click on it. And as you may recall, anytime you press the Alt or Option key when you're working with the white arrow tool, you get a little plus sign next to the cursor, which indicates you're going to select the entire subpath, at which point you can go ahead and drag it around. The ring's going to work a little differently for you. Notice if you Alt or Option click on the outside circle, for example, and drag it, then you'll move it independently of the inside circle. If you want to select both the inside and outside circles, then presumably you would press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac to undo that move, and then you would Alt or Option click on that path outline a second time in order to select the entire compound path. And so what we have here is a compound path working inside of a compound shape. If you want to select the entire compound shape, you would Alt or Option click again. And as you can see, that lights up the rectangle as well as the triangle. And now you can move them around as one unit. But you should note that because the triangle is no longer overlapping anything, it's not uniting with any of the shapes either. If you want to change that, then click off the shapes to deselect them, Alt or Option click on that triangle, and then drag it so that you have an overlap. All right, now let's move on to minus front. I'll go ahead and press the V key to switch back to the black arrow tool, and I'll marquee these shapes, and I'll Alt or Option click on the minus front icon, which is the second icon in the first row. Notice this time we're subtracting all the forward shapes from the rear one, which means that we're doing a lot of cutting at this point. And so let's say I want to modify this compound shape. I'll go ahead and double click on it to switch to the isolation mode, at which point I'm not going to see those subpaths anymore unless I go up to the View menu and choose Outline or press Control-Y or Command-Y on the Mac, at which point I will see them, which makes it easier to drag them around as we're seeing here. Problem is, we're not really seeing the interaction anymore until I switch back to the preview mode, which you do by either choosing one of the preview commands from the view menu or, again, pressing Control Y or Command Y on a Mac. Now, the problem is, what if you want to regain that interaction between the two rings? So, for example, you want to change these guys into a compound path. Well, that's not possible when you're working inside of a compound shape. If I go up to the Object menu, choose Compound Path, and choose Make, Illustrator is going to scold me and tell me you can't do it. So if that's what you want, what you've got to do is go ahead and click OK, of course, and then press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac as many times as it takes to regain your original path outlines. Then go ahead and marquee those two guys, and either go up to the Object menu, choose Compound Path, and choose Make, or, of course, you could just click instead of Alt or Option clicking on minus front in order to subtract one path outline from the other. Then marquee what is now 3 paths and Alt or Option click on minus front in order to turn them into a compound shape. And now if I double click on any one of them, I can grab this guy and move him over here, for example, and then I'll grab the triangle and move him in a little bit as well, and we have a totally different configuration. You can also change how the subtracting is working by clicking on one of the path outlines, then right-click and choose Arrange, Send to Back. And that way, the forward shapes will be cut away from the ring because it is now at the back of the stack. That's not what I want, however, so I'll just go ahead and press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac, and then I'll press the Escape key to exit out of the isolation mode. All right, now let's try our hands at Intersect by marqueing those path outlines and Alt or Option clicking on the third icon in the first row. And this time we don't see anything, and that's because there is no point at which all 3 of the path outlines intersect. So to change that, I'll just go ahead and double-click on those paths to enter the isolation mode. And then notice, if you will, when I hover my cursor over something that's there, whether it's invisible or not, I see a little square next to my arrow. If there's nothing under my arrow, I don't see a square. So whenever you see a square, go ahead and try clicking and then move it to a different location. And sure enough, now I see that I have a little bit of intersection between all of these path outlines. The thing about intersect, though, is the more path outlines you have, the less likely they are to intersect. And so you may want to keep the equation fairly simple by clicking on the triangle, for example, and I'm clicking on the top of it so I can select it independently of the ring, and then just pressing the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac to get rid of it. And that way you can drag the ring over the rectangle and get some more interaction. All right, I'll once again press the Escape key in order to exit the isolation mode. And finally, I'll marquee this last group of shapes and Alt or Option click on the 4th icon in the first row, which represents Exclude. And now you can see that any place where the path outlines overlap, they either create a hole or the path outline ends up showing up again. And so, for example, a really interesting thing to do with Exclude is double-click on the path outline, of course, to enter the isolation mode. And then just drag these guys around and notice how they keep interacting with each other. So it's an even-odd equation. In other words, anytime 2 subpaths overlap, you get a hole. When 3 overlap, you get a fill. When 4 overlap, you get another hole, and so forth. And so if I were to marquee all these paths and then make sure that Align to Selection is active up here in the control panel, then I could click on Horizontal Align Center followed by Vertical Align Center in order to center all these paths like so. The only one that's not going to center properly is the triangle, because Illustrator is terrible at judging the center of a triangle, so I'll just have to go ahead and nudge that guy upward. And then I'll press the Escape key in order to exit the group isolation mode. And that's how you work with entirely dynamic compound shapes that you can create using any of the 4 shape modes here inside Illustrator.